Hey friends, Peggy Hall back with you from thehealthyamerican.org. Today I want to tell you a little bit of a personal story, my connection to 9/11. So I'm recording this. I'm actually saying the date. I've heard that YouTube does not like to have people broadcast about this. I'm not going to be doing too much of a deep dive into the actual events and my questions about that, but my story is going to be my story, what happened to me or where I was that day, the interesting connection to Morocco. And I have been, and I will continue to do my research on the Morocco earthquake and the interesting connection of Maui with a Moroccan heading up the federal public housing authority there. So there are so many interesting things that are connecting Morocco to the current day, to my past, and to the present right here. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, is where I was when that happened, how that impacted me, the connection that it has with Morocco, and then I will continue to do additional coverage on the Morocco earthquake and on some very eye-raising information about Marrakesh being the center of some very important meetings with the United Nations, with the international bankers, and with digital currency, with the LED light bulbs that are going to be going on in Marrakesh. So this incident has just opened up the box that I'm doing a deep dive into, and I will be carrying all of that for you coming up. This is a sponsored show, and I do want to thank the longtime sponsor of The Healthy American, and we are going to hop right on over to noblegoldinvestments.com. So let me share my screen here. Oh, and speaking of screens, this is my virtual living room. Somebody made a comment such as, wow, you have such beautiful homes. And it's like, yeah, and they're absolutely free and you can have them as well. So these are images that are behind me. So this is my virtual living room. And for the time being, I'm just keeping my location private. I don't want to say anything more than that. And this is a nice way that I can feature some beautiful backgrounds and bring these videos to you. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll hop right on over to noblegoldinvestments.com. And you might be feeling unsure about your finances these days, like many people. You are not alone. That's why Noble Gold Investments is here to help. Just hear it straight from the folks that they've helped. The Noble crew walked me through everything, no stress. And another person said, with their help, I can finally sleep easy at night. So this month, Noble Gold Investments is handing out free 5-ounce silver America the Beautiful coins if you qualify for your IRA. You can get your information right here. Go to noblegoldinvestments.com. You can invest in gold and silver. And the phone number here is 877-646-5347. It's the only gold company that I trust. And of course, there is no guarantee of your investment, and there's always a risk. So I want to give that disclaimer. All right. Friends, I want to talk to you about my 9/11 story. Now, there are plenty of people on YouTube, on BitChute, on Rumble. There have been books that have been written about this, analyzing it, presenting information, and asking questions about things that just don't add up. That's not the deep dive that I'm going to do for you today, but I will just kind of touch on that a little bit to tell you my 9/11 story. So I lived in Morocco. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I traveled in Morocco. I worked for a private company in Morocco. So I've spent many years there. I speak Arabic, I speak French, and I have been interested in different cultures and countries for as long as I can remember. I've traveled quite a bit, and I had a very let's just say, fascinating experience in Morocco. The Moroccans, by and large, are warm, hospitable, friendly people. There is a very long history between Morocco and the United States. Morocco was the first country to sign a treaty with the United States, a treaty of peace and friendship. And in fact, I did a newsletter about that today. So please get on my free Healthy American newsletter to find out all about that and stay up to date. So what's interesting is I had spent my, let's say, kind of early adulthood traveling quite a bit, living in Morocco. And then after I was married, I wanted to travel to Morocco with my husband. And we actually had tickets to Morocco. And those tickets were for September 16th. I actually had my bags packed. We were so excited to go. I was working at the university at the time. We cleared our calendar for our vacation. We were going to go for about 10 days, and we already had the suitcases there ready to go. That morning of 9/11, I was driving to the university and I was listening to the radio back in the days when I actually listened to the news on the radio. I still didn't watch anything on TV. It's just something that I didn't ever care for. And as I'm driving to work, I'm hearing about this incident, this event. And by the time I got to work, people were riveted and they had like TVs on. Because there was no YouTube or anything back then. So people were watching the news as it was unfolding. And I will say that I definitely was affected by the emotional overwhelm that was being presented by this incident. That is, let me just put it this way, regardless of whether things are occurring the way that we're being told, whether they are or aren't, the fact is that the news wants to elicit an emotional response. That's why I endeavor on this channel, although I do flip my lid and have rants and all of that, I do seek to be evidence-based. I like to look for the facts because facts will reveal the truth. And I like to revisit some information later after the emotional response has calmed down just a bit. I want to double check to make sure that you guys can hear me here as well, since I am back on my headset here. So let me just double check that we are a-okay. Great. So having said that, this is not the day that I'm doing a deep dive on what happened, but I am going to give you the deep dive on what happened to me, if that makes sense. I was caught up in the emotional overwhelm like many people. And I remember that day at work, I think people even went home and classes were probably canceled. It's a little bit of a blur to me, other than it was very distressing and people were distraught. And of course, I personally felt, oh, I can't believe it, because now I can't go to Morocco. Immediately, they were saying that all of the flights were grounded and there were not going to be any there was not going to be any travel for several days. And all of this was coming out in the news. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I had tickets to go. And that was only one aspect of it. Of course, I was horrified by everything that I saw. But even then, even in the midst of all of the images and all of the broadcast, I still could notice a few things that didn't add up to me. So because I don't have a TV, I went to my mom's house later that day, my mom and dad's, and I watched some of the news coverage because it was just, it riveted everyone. And I remember my mom so clearly and compellingly say to me, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. The United States was attacked. That was the, image and the, let's say the narrative that was being pushed. And my mom said this: the United States is not a building. That really impacted me. And I know exactly what she meant. The United States is not a building. And I've done videos on this channel before about the spirit of what it means to be an American. And I'm not talking about, having a passport, or it's the American spirit of freedom and stick-to-itiveness and self-responsibility and all of those things that make America and being an American what that is to me. So I hope that I will try to link those videos to you. And that actually helped me put my feet back on the ground, that planes going into a building, if you really think that's what happened, taking down the buildings could not take down the United States. However, what happened after that was the unfortunate fast tracking of the demise of our freedom, because the Patriot Act, which is it should be called the Slavery Act. Notice that what they call these laws and these bills in Congress are the exact opposite. Like the Inflation Reduction Act actually increased inflation, and the Affordable Care Act for healthcare actually made everybody's premiums go up. I couldn't even afford health insurance after that. And I didn't used to have a deductible, and I did. And that's why I no longer have health insurance. I have a Christian health share ministry, and I've done videos on that in the past. It's called Samaritan Ministries, if you're interested. So the Patriot Act is what caused you to be groped at the airport. That's what caused you to have to take your shoes off and to be subjected to these, I call them cancer screening boxes at the airport. All of that happened after the Patriot Act. Try to get a new bank account, and you'll see the paperwork that's required for that. And several other illegal, illegitimate, unconstitutional measures were carried out under the name of the Patriot Act, because the government wanted to keep you safe from these bad guys that took over a plane with box cutters. Okay. Even back then, I was like, wait a minute, you mean, I thought it was something else, like they must have some giant box cutters or whatever. It's like, you have to be careful on this channel, because they will, they're not going to like what I have to say about that. But just think about that in and of itself. Like, that's a lethal weapon. I mean, some of these things just didn't add up. So as I'm at my mom's house and I'm watching the news unfold, and this, again, it may have been over a period of days, I can't remember exactly, but the overall feeling I got was one of questioning, like, wow, some of this doesn't add up to me. There were 2 planes, but 3 buildings went down, and so many other things that many people have covered at great length. They've studied it. I'm just here to pose a few questions. But the one thing that really got me was, and maybe you remember this, somehow in all that destruction, everything, buildings that just collapsed, that many people said looked like it was a controlled demolition, right? They just fell as if they were taking down some big hotel in Las Vegas. You can watch videos like that to see what I'm talking about. They were able to find the passports intact of the bad guys. Like, wow, that's amazing. Isn't that amazing? Out of all of the destruction, and they knew that those were the bad guys, that the passports that were found actually belonged to the bad guys. All right. So that really kicked off a lot of my questioning, everything that I was being shown. And again, I don't even watch TV. I didn't care for it. I didn't like to watch the news, but you can't help but see it, right? You're at a restaurant, they've got the news playing. You go to get your nails done, they've got the news on. You go to the gym, the news is on. So you can't help but see it. And thank goodness more and more and more people have seen it, and they are exposing these questions and these things. But the point for me is that I ended up not going to Morocco because of that, everything being closed down. And then in the subsequent months and years after that, I just could not believe, and I know many people stopped flying because of it. I could not believe how our rights were violated. There were so many videos, just like there were videos a couple of years ago of people that were breathing oxygen, that were being tackled and arrested. Back in the day, if you remember, again, YouTube wasn't really, I don't think it was around in 2001. I don't think it came on the scene until about 2006 or 7, something like that. Anyhow, there were somehow videos on TV or making the rounds of people being arrested and being hauled off because they were objecting to being basically, sexually assaulted just because they were trying to fly. The fact that you are wanting to get on a plane does not make you a criminal. And many people spoke out against that. And I don't think any of the lawsuits ever went anywhere because they're still doing that. I didn't want to be subjected to those cancer screeners that were emitting all sorts of radiation that were untested. And there were cancer clusters that were showing up with the TSA workers in certain airports. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. So I would opt out. And again, this is years ago. I would opt out of that, box, and they would make me go through for the secondary inspection. And so when they'd be groping me, this is what I would do. I would, one time I just repeated the Lord's Prayer out loud. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Another time I just started singing at the top of my voice, God bless America. And one time I said the Pledge of Allegiance, and I just tried to make a spectacle for the people that were walking by, seeing me being groped. And I know you could have the private rooms, but I wasn't even going to do that. I wanted people to see that my rights were being violated. Let me know if you stopped flying by plane because of that. So I barely have been flying anyway with all of, I certainly didn't fly during the suffocation days and all of that, but that is what ushered in the beginning of the end of our freedoms. And some would say it started a long time before that. It probably did, but it was blatantly fast tracked. That also set the stage for related types of laws where if you live in a different country, that country, your bank account in that country, they are going to give that information to the IRS. All sorts of things like this where it's just like out of bounds, but they hit it all in the idea of they didn't want any money laundering for these terrorist activities, because you know, most of the Americans in the United States fall into that category. So the whole thing I thought was ridiculous. Of course, they're blaming the Arabs. And that, again, I don't have evidence really for that to be the case, other than they have to choose a boogeyman. Later down the line with the Osama bin Laden, they said that they ambushed him at the compound, but then in keeping with the Muslim religion, they just gave him a burial at sea. Oh yeah, because they really cared about the Muslim religion after they exterminated this boogeyman. None of that added up to me as well. But I would say for me, let me know in a comment below what the red flags were for you. The biggest thing for me was the passports. It's like, that it just doesn't make sense. Box cutters, yeah, no. Later, they had like the underwear bomber. I'm surprised they didn't make people take off their underwear. They made people take off their shoes because like they had the shoe bomber. Yeah, right. Okay, how many people are on a plane? Let's just average it out between the big planes and the small, maybe 500 people on a plane. Let's say maybe 1,000. And there are so few plane accidents given how many flights are going around, going on at all times. It just seems to me that and there are people, you may even disagree with me. You may say, Peggy, whatever it takes, I want to be safe. I don't care if they make me take my underwear off. I want to be on a plane without any bad guys. Okay, well, that's your opinion. My opinion is completely different. My opinion is that I'm taking a risk to go on a plane anyway, because there's no guarantee that that flight is not going to have any problems. And why should millions of people have their rights taken away for a few hundred people that might have a plane taken over by some bad guys? Frankly, I didn't believe any of those previous jack hikings, I'll just put it that way. Over the years, I think probably a lot of those were sensationalized, maybe even staged. That's just me. I'm highly skeptical. Even if I see things with my own eyes, I want the evidence. I want to connect those clots. So that is my I think it's interesting story about my connection to 9/11. I actually have not been back to Morocco ever since. I don't know if I will be going back. It is on board to be the smart cities, the United Nations Agenda 2030. I've been doing my coverage on Maui, and I will continue to do that. And I will continue to bring you information about Morocco because it's all connected. There's a Moroccan who is the head of the federal public housing authority in Hawaii, in the state of Hawaii. And he's got somewhat of a controversial background that I'm about to expose in an upcoming video. So I hope that you'll stick with me, and some very interesting things about him. Why is not a Hawaiian in charge, or maybe not even Hawaiian blood, but someone born in Hawaii? Doesn't that make more sense to you? Why would they bring in an outsider who they said was a hotel executive? Well, I'll show you the hotel that he ran, and you can read some of the TripAdvisor comments about that. That doesn't add up to me either. And he is in charge of the contracts for these housing units that, of course, are the Pack'em and Stack'ems. And he is the one doing the contracts. And one of the contracts he did with a company in California that I'm about to share with you in the next video, the president of that company is also an Arab. is Egyptian. Now, again, I don't have anything against Arabs, Egyptians, and Moroccans. I don't even think they were the ones doing the 9/11. So don't get me wrong, but I find it interesting. That's how I just connect things. I look at patterns and it's like, why is that? Do you think like the one Arab did his Arab buddy a favor, or like I lived in Morocco, so I know how that stuff operates, right? There's a lot, that's how the country works, which frankly is why I don't think they're going to be on track for Agenda 2030, because things just don't get done in that country very quickly. It's just the nature of the culture there. And it can be a beautiful thing where you have extended, time is just fluid. You don't have things done in order and on time, which is why all of that I saw in the aftermath of the earthquake was astonishing to me, that they had hospital beds set up within hours. And we didn't know where that was or who brought the hospital beds or who took the photo. We don't know if it was a stock photo from a different event. There were actually earth movers, I guess that's what they're called, some kind of tractor, tractors were on the scene like almost immediately. That's stunning to me in any country, not just Morocco, but especially in Morocco. So a lot of things are very curious to me. Now, I'm not saying there was no earthquake. It looked to me like there was. I'm curious as to how it occurred. And the other thing is, living in California most of my life where we have earthquakes, it was stunning to me the number of people that were running out of buildings. I've been in a few earthquakes, some pretty major ones. It never occurred to me to run out of a building. In fact, we were always taught to go under something, like under a desk or stand in a doorway, and you don't run because something might fall on you. That's just me. Maybe it's different in Morocco. So a lot of those things didn't add up when I saw the footage. All right, friends, I just wanted to give a little bit of a kind of remote connection with 9/11. If you are interested, there are so many people that are digging into that. Just do your research. I don't even really have a direction to point you in other than there's lots of books. But even then, you need to go with a critical eye, like who wrote this? What might be their hidden reason for doing it? What else have they written? Why are they positioning that? Now, I would say one of the most stunning pieces of evidence that I saw was when Bush was in a classroom and he was reading a storybook to the children. And prior to that, and I'm sure you can find this online, the teacher had a list of vocabulary words, and the vocabulary words seemed completely unrelated. It's not like she was teaching, phonics or spelling. They were just random words. And the words were things like steal, hit. Do you guys remember that one? I'll have to find it again. And if you can put out some more of what of those vocabulary words were, when you put it together, you were like, this is really, really strange. And of course, they were filming Bush as he was reading this story, right? How about that? And somebody came and whispered in his ear, giving us, the people, an opportunity to see when Bush was alerted to this event happening. So I think that, to me, looked very staged as well. That's about all I can say on this channel before I trip the algorithm or something. My heart does go out to anyone who was affected by that. And it's likely that people were. They lost their jobs. Oh, there's some really, really interesting connections with JFK. You know how I like to talk about JFK and RFK. So JFK was RFK's uncle, right? And his father, right, JFK's father, so this would be RFK's grandfather, Joe Kennedy, married his wife. Actually, this is probably good for another video, but his wife was from the family that had a business later in that World Trade Center. And I will bring all of that to you in a separate video. I know I'm going a little far afield here, but I will also say that Joe Kennedy, I'm sure he was long gone when 9/11 happened, but he was a movie producer. Yeah, just putting that out there. When you think about JFK and what happened to him, some things didn't add up there either. Just keep in mind that his father, who wanted the first son, who was also named Joseph Kennedy, who died under mysterious circumstances in a plane crash during World War II, but not in combat. And then, so that was one son, his oldest son. He wanted him to be president. And then there was a daughter who was about to, or was just entering into a controversial marriage, and she died in a plane crash in Europe. So that was really strange. So he had 2 children that died in plane crashes. And then of course, JFK Jr. reportedly had met his demise in a plane crash. It's like, if I was in that family, I wouldn't be flying on any private planes. Those were all in small private planes. So because Joe Sr., I mean, Joe Jr., right? The Joe Sr. was the father, and then the JFK's brother was Joe, who died. Then the father put JFK out there because he really wanted him in politics. And Joe Kennedy was the youngest major banker in the United States. All right. He started a bank. And so the Kennedy family is all about big banking. And just throwing it out here because I know you're interested. So when you hear RFK on his campaign trail demonize the big pharma, no, nothing wrong with that. And he's all in flavor of global swarming, but he never mentions the big banks. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'd like you to dig into that a little deeper and see if he ever demonizes the big banks, because that's what the history of his family that he's always talking about is a part of. So Joe Kennedy, and let me know if you want to know more about this, because I've read books about this. It's quite interesting how Joe Kennedy ruined like Gloria Swanson's career and Tom Mix and others. He was really, really like one of the worst businessmen ever. He just completely would swindle people. Very, very bad character, Joseph Kennedy. And he was also the ambassador to the UK during World War II. And he was known, how can I put this delicately, to be in favor of, I need to put a few words between the algorithm here. You know, that guy that was doing this stuff in Germany? Yeah, he had a funny little mustache. Remember that guy? Yeah. Well, Joe Kennedy thought what he was doing was great, actually. And so he had a lot of very unfortunate statements about people of a certain faith that guy in Germany didn't like. But Joe Kennedy thought, like, what's wrong with that? So just letting you know, this is validated. These are, you can hear the words and read his statements. And that was what he was up to in World War II. So I find that very, very interesting. And just his business dealings, he was the one that very shrewdly, people said that he just had like a premonition that the stock market was going to go down. So he shrewdly made some exchanges and drew his money out and all of that right before the stock market went down. He said that a shoe shine boy gave him a tip, because, that's why he's a shoe shine boy, because he made it big in the stock market. And of course, this big banker, Joseph Kennedy, would listen to advice from a shoe shine boy. It makes total sense to me. So why are there financial advisors? People should just go to shoe shine boys. And then get this, Joseph Kennedy, after shorting the market, after making out okay in the big 1929 collapse, guess what? That's what kicked off the whole SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And you're not going to believe this. Well, you probably will. Guess who was made the first commissioner? Joey Kennedy. After all of his swindling and scandalous things, he was put in as the first commissioner. How do they call it? The fox guarding the hen house. This is the Kennedy family. Just letting you know. Yeah. So I think I'll wrap up on that point, friends. I kind of went a little far afield, but let me know if you'd like a separate video all about that. I'm sure it won't bother anyone, because those that are in favor of what RFK stands for, which is at the polar opposite of what I stand for, they've already left this channel. I don't think they'll ever watch it again, because I showed how he was manipulating the language so that he could, how does the expression go? Speak out of both sides of his mouth. And even if it had nothing to do with cooties cocktails or anything, I am 100% in opposition of his stance on global swarming, on his stance on the sanctity of life, which he says, you know what, it's sad. It's sad that children are killed, but so I'm not in favor of him as a candidate. But I want you to draw your own conclusions. I'm not telling you what to think. Hopefully, I'm giving you some information so that you can dig deeper and use your critical thinking skills. So that's more of a how to think, not what to think. And I'm letting you know what I think, because that's why you're on this channel. You want to hear that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being on board. Give me a few minutes. I'm going to queue up the information about the Moroccan who is running the federal housing projects in Hawaii, and some very curious things that I dug up there. And then I think tomorrow I will continue my coverage on the earthquake in Morocco, because there are some very interesting things, and I'm doing a deep dive on the LED light bulbs that are being exchanged being put throughout Marrakesh. And I want you to leave a comment, and please email support@thehealthyamerican.org if you have more information about those LED light bulbs. Now, the city of San Diego had to take down all of their LEDs because they were gathering private information from the population. And that was scandalous. It's very, very difficult to find anything about that story. Every time I'm digging, all of those news stories are scrubbed about San Diego, other than to say that they stopped working with this one company. So there's a major company that has these contracts in Marrakesh. Marrakesh also was where they had the United Nations global swarming. I think it was back in 2015. And that's what kicked off their Agenda 2030. So that kicked off in 2015. And we're at the midway point right now, which is why Josh Green do Deal and others are like racing to the finish line, because they want to have everything, everybody in the Pack'em and Stack'ems with the electronic prisons basically by 2030. And sadly, Morocco is right up there with them. Frankly, I don't think it's really going to happen, except in cities like these villages that were wiped out. And these weren't just Moroccan villages. These were Berber villages. Berbers were the, you would say, the original indigenous people of Morocco. And they have their own language. They have their own culture. They have their own traditions, their own clothing. It's fascinating. And they're very closed, so to speak, in terms of people coming in if you can't speak their language. And they've kept that alive. But imagine wiping out those villages. Where are they going to rebuild? Are they going to put them in some Pack'em and Stack'ems outside the outskirts of Marrakesh? That just may be. I'm going to dig into all of that, but there's so much, friends. And I want to thank you so much for being on board. I know this was a longer video than normal, but you've told me that you like the long videos, long form videos. So I normally try to stick around maybe 20 minutes or so, but sometimes there's just a lot to cover. I want to thank you for subscribing, resubscribing. Many of you have said that you've seen YouTube freeze my count. You'll hit the like button and it doesn't add up. It's just never going to add up, friends. But that's why I want you to join me every day, 4 p.m. Pacific, that's 7 p.m. Eastern. And we will continue to dig and keep our faculties of critical thinking alive, because we can use those skills regardless of what the hogwashers slosh all over us. We'll know how to look for the signs, the symbols, the colors, the numbers, connect the clots in terms of the bigger picture and what they have in store for us. But I want everyone to feel empowered, because knowledge is power. I would much rather see what's going on than to feel like I had the wool pulled over my eyes. I feel more powerful when I can say, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't add up and that doesn't add up. The other thing that didn't add up for me, speaking of things that don't add up, in 9/11 was that picture of the falling man. Remember that one? Okay, I'm going to show an image, and if you don't want to see it, then please don't look. But let me share my screen, and I'll just, this was something I wanted to share with you. This purportedly was a picture taken by a fellow, and he said, I didn't take the picture, the camera took the picture. Okay, that right there, it's kind of like the astronauts when they were hemming and hawing because they didn't want to really admit that they weren't on the moon. This guy's like, well, I didn't really take the picture. The camera took the picture, because he didn't want to implicate himself. What I think is amazing, if you're falling, like your arms aren't out to your side, your clothes are not, don't you think the clothes would be away from the body with the kind of air? It just, the other thing is I couldn't find it. Let me know if you know where it is. This image predated this event. In other words, it was used like on an album cover or in a TV show or something. I cannot find it. They're scrubbing the internet. So when I saw this image, I thought, that looks a little staged to me. And then what about these cars? I just did a Giggle search to see what Giggle is dishing up. And I know that there purportedly were fires in the buildings, but I don't know. It looks like an explosion to me, these cars. And I don't have any information on, you know, if they are doing it the way that they're doing other things. But somebody asked me to show images, and okay, that's not it. Here's 9/11 here. So I'm not drawing a conclusion other than to see that there is a lot of glass blown out and the cars are definitely destroyed. I actually don't know how they pulled that off, but I'm very skeptical with the story that we were told. I'll just put it that way. There are plenty of others that have done deep dives. And again, if I'm completely off base and there are those that perished, my heart and prayers go with those and everyone who has been affected by these events, whether they're orchestrated, natural, or otherwise. All right, friends, I promised you I'm signing off now, and stick with me because I've got another video queued up for you in just a little bit. And big shout out to the